Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today, really deep.
Deep?
Yeah, into this fascinating topic.
Yeah.
It's all about, how people react to religion and why. Like what's really going on there. We're using some excerpts from, I think it's called Understanding Reactions to Religion.
Beyond Stereotypes, I think.
Yeah, Beyond Stereotypes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're going way past those simple surface level explanations,
Right.
We want to figure out those deeper reasons why people might have sometimes negative reactions to religion.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was thinking a lot of times it's not about disagreeing with like the actual beliefs themselves, right?
You're absolutely right. It's often way more, I guess you could say nuanced than that. It's
Yeah.
not just about like doctrine. It's so much more personal,
Right.
It's about how religion has shown up in someone's life, how it's made them feel.
Yeah, and like what kind of experiences have they had?
Exactly.
So like, let's say someone grew up with super strict religious rules.
Oh.
Right. No room to like question things or be yourself.
Yeah.
How do you think that would shape their view of religion later on?
Well, I think it would be pretty understandable if they, kind of rejected it, right?
Yeah.
If all they associate with religion is being controlled and, stifled, it makes sense that they'd want to break free.
Right. Freedom's important.
Exactly. It's like this deep need we all have.
Yeah. But okay, so that's like one example, right? But what about like when people have a negative reaction to just like normal, everyday expressions of faith?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like someone just, mentioning their church or something.
Right.
What's going on there? That seems, more complicated.
I think it is more complicated, and often it's like tied to something deeper, maybe even a bit darker in their past.
Okay, darker how?
Well, think about societies where religion has been used to justify really terrible things like oppression or discrimination.
Right, right.
People from those cultures, they might carry this deep fear of religious authority.
Yeah.
Even if it's, presented in a totally harmless way. It's like a reflex almost.
A reflex, like a trauma response almost.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. And it's not always personal. It can be like this inherited cultural memory that shapes how they see things.
That's really interesting. So it's not always direct firsthand experience.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
This actually ties into something they talked about in the source, how being exposed to just the extreme examples of religion can really
Warp,
their whole understanding.
Totally. It's like, imagine if the only
The only thing.
Yeah, the only thing you knew about Christianity was like those fire and brimstone preachers,
Right.
Or if everything you knew about Islam was like from sensationalized news stories about extremism,
Okay.
you'd have a totally skewed perspective, right?
Absolutely. It's like judging a whole country based on like a crazy trip to a tourist trap.
Yeah.
You're not getting the real picture at all.
Exactly. And speaking of not getting the full picture, that's why it's so important to remember that religion isn't this one big monolithic thing, right?
Yeah. They called it a spectrum, didn't they?
Yes, a spectrum. It's not one size fits all. There's so much diversity within each faith.
So it's not just like believer or non-believer.
Right. There are so many shades in between. You've got people who, interpret everything literally. Then you've got people who see it more metaphorically and everything in between. And that impacts everything, their personal values, their politics, you name it.
So basically, there are all these different ways of like living out your faith.
Exactly.
Okay, so with all this variation, generalizations are like totally out the window then, right?
Pretty much, yeah. To really understand someone's reaction to religion, you have to like engage with the complexity of it all.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that means being open to like different perspectives.
Oh, absolutely. And that means actually talking to people who embody those different expressions of faith, not just sticking to our own little echo chambers.
That's right.
Right.
Because when you actually meet people who are like living their faith in all these different ways, it breaks down those stereotypes.
So it's about like genuine dialogue, actually listening and not just trying to, win an argument or something.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even with our differences, we all share this common humanity.
So I guess what we've learned today is that understanding people's reactions to religion, it's way more than just agreeing or disagreeing with a set of beliefs.
Right.
It's about like seeing the whole person, their experiences, their culture, how they've been exposed to religion, all of it.
Yeah, it's about the bigger picture.
Yeah. And maybe, just maybe, that can help us move beyond all those stereotypes and like actually connect with each other, even when our views are totally different.
I think so.
Yeah.
I really do. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. Knowing everything we've talked about today, how can we, each of us, how can we contribute to a more respectful and understanding dialogue about religion, even with people who see things completely differently than we do? A big question, but it's worth asking.
It really is. Food for thought.
ready to untangle some more history with me?
Always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So today, we're tackling the history of the Jewish people.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a big one, right? And to help us out, we've got a couple of really cool sources. They're both called, well, one is A Concise History of the Jewish People, and the other is just A History of the Jewish People.
Sounds pretty straightforward, but I bet there's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we're talking about thousands of years of history,
Yeah.
incredible stories, a culture that's been through, just about everything you can imagine.
Yeah, resilience is kind of their thing, from what I've read.
Totally. So how do we even begin to cover it all? I mean, where do you even start with a story this massive?
Well, most stories start at the beginning. And in this case, we're going back to the patriarchal period. We're talking like 18th century BCE, the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Those are some big names, right? Like the foundation of Jewish identity.
Exactly. This period is really all about laying the groundwork for what it means to be Jewish. It's about that unique covenant with God, the promise of an ancestral homeland, the whole deal.
It's crazy how these ancient stories still resonate with people today. It's like such a powerful foundation.
Right. But from what I've gathered, things don't stay all peaceful and idyllic for very long,
Oh, yeah. I've got a feeling we're about to get into some drama, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This early period, it's about establishing a core identity, but it also kind of sets up this pattern of displacement and return that we see again and again throughout Jewish history. Like, take the Israelites, they're descendants of Jacob, and they end up in Egypt, right?
Okay.
Welcomed at first, but eventually they become, enslaved.
It doesn't sound good.
Nope, not at all. And this whole shift in their situation, that's what sets the scene for one of the most dramatic chapters in Jewish history, the Exodus.
Okay, now we're talking. This is the stuff everyone's heard of, right?
Yeah.
Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, parting the Red Sea, the whole epic of skill.
It's a powerful story. But, it's so much more than just escaping slavery.
Really? More than that?
Yeah, think about it. This escape from Egypt, it's like this huge moment of liberation. It's literally the birth of a nation. And then they receive the Torah at Mount Sinai.
Oh, right. That's like their constitution, their set of laws.
Right, all of that. It lays the foundation for their law, their morality, their entire cultural identity. It's like this moment when a group of families fleeing oppression become a people united by these shared laws, values, and that covenant with God.
Wow, that's powerful. But, they get to the promised land, and it's not like everything's easy, right?
Of course not. I mean, settling Canaan under Joshua, that involved conquering new territories and basically building a whole new society from the ground up.
I can't even imagine.
It was a process for sure. And what's interesting about this period, the time of Judges, is that you see this very decentralized leadership structure, really different from the monarchy that comes later.
Ooh. Okay, so let's talk about that monarchy. We're getting into some of the big names everyone associates with Jewish history, right? Saul, David, Solomon. What were the major moments for those guys?
Well, David, he's the one who makes Jerusalem the capital. It unifies the tribes and really solidifies their national identity. And then you've got Solomon, who builds the first temple in Jerusalem.
Right, the first temple. Huge symbol, right?
Exactly. It becomes the center of Jewish religious life, a symbol of their covenant with God. Under Solomon, you see this golden age of cultural and political influence, really a high point.
Sounds like they're on top of the world. But history has a way of, changing things up, right?
You got it. And Solomon's death, it actually kind of exposed some cracks in that whole unified kingdom idea. It splits, and that actually foreshadows a lot of the vulnerabilities they face later on. Like the northern kingdom, it falls to the Assyrians in 722 BCE. Devastating loss.
That's right around the time the southern kingdom of Judah faces its own tragic fate, right?
All right. Exactly. And that leads us right into the Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE and the destruction of the first temple. Talk about a moment of profound loss and upheaval.
How do they even cope with that? I mean, their central place of worship is gone, right?
It was the beginning of the Babylonian exile, a really, really tough time for them. But this is where we see that resilience in action again. Forced from their homeland, they find ways to hold on to their identity, their faith, their community.
Like, what did that even look like? How did they do that?
Well, it's actually the beginning of the synagogue becoming a central place for prayer and study. It was a time of huge introspection, and new forms of religious practice start to develop.
So even in exile, they were finding ways not just to survive, but to lay the groundwork for the future of Judaism.
Exactly. And, this isn't a permanent end to their presence in their homeland either.
Wait, really? What happened?
Well, Cyrus the Great, he conquers Babylon, right? And he issues a decree that allows the Jews to return to Zion.
Wow, talk about a turnaround.
It's a huge moment of hope for them. They rebuild the Second Temple, and it's like this rekindling of their religious and cultural life.
Must have been amazing, but also kind of daunting, right? like rebuilding your homeland after being away for so long.
Totally. And, rebuilding a society after decades of exile, it had its own set of challenges, but it sets the stage for a whole new phase of Jewish history.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of challenges are we talking?
Well, for one thing, this is where we start to see different sects emerging within Judaism. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes. Each one had its own take on Jewish law and tradition.
So there's this internal diversity of thought starting to emerge.
Exactly. And then you've got the Hellenistic period starting to influence.
The Greeks. I'm curious about how they impacted Jewish society and if there was any pushback against that influence.
Well, as you might imagine, Greek influence starts creeping in, and it definitely creates some tension. Some people embraced the new ideas, others resisted. And that tension eventually boils over with the Hasmonean Revolt, a fight for religious freedom against some pretty oppressive decrees.
Wait, is this where the story of Hanukkah comes from? The whole celebration of resilience that's still going strong today?
That's the one. But unfortunately, the fight for autonomy didn't end there. And that's where the Romans enter the picture.
Uh-oh, the Romans. I have a feeling this is about to get a little messy.
Yeah, the Romans become a major force in the region. Their influence over Judea grows, and eventually it leads to direct Roman rule. And as you can probably guess, that sets the stage for a whole new set of challenges and conflicts.
Okay, so the Romans are in charge now, and things are probably going to get a bit, intense, right?
Yeah, you could say that. This period is definitely marked by escalating tensions and eventually, tragedy. Roman rule gets more and more oppressive, and that leads to a number of uprisings.
And that's all building up to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D., right, by the Roman general Titus.
Exactly. It's another one of those pivotal moments of loss and dispersal that really shapes the course of Jewish history. I mean, think about it. The Second Temple had been the center of their religious and cultural life for centuries.
Yeah, I can only imagine how devastating that must have been for them, to have that central place of worship just gone. How did Judaism even survive that?
Well, it definitely changed things dramatically, but what's amazing is how they adapted. With the temple gone, the focus shifted to rabbinic Judaism. Synagogues, which were already around as places for prayer and study, they took on a whole new significance. They became like the central focus for Jewish religious life.
So the destruction of the temple actually leads to this whole new form of Judaism.
Wow.
It's like another testament to their resilience, right?
Right. Absolutely. It shows how they were able to find meaning and continuity even when everything was changing around them. And it's in this period that rabbis, scholars of Jewish law and tradition, they emerge as the new leaders. They guided the community and interpreted the sacred texts.
And this is where we see the development of the Talmud, right? That massive collection of rabbinic teachings and commentaries.
Exactly. The Talmud becomes a vital source of guidance, legal interpretation, spiritual wisdom, all of that. It's this incredibly complex text, and it was developed over centuries of debate and interpretation. It really shows the dynamism and intellectual vibrancy of rabbinic Judaism.
It's like this period sets the stage for how Judaism would be practiced for centuries to come. But before we move too far ahead, what about the Bar Kokhba revolt? It seems like this last desperate stand against Roman rule.
Yeah, it was a final attempt to overthrow the Romans. Sadly, it didn't go well. The revolt was crushed, which led to even more people being exiled. And that kind of marks the beginning of a long period of diaspora for the Jewish people.
So they're scattered, but they don't just disappear, right? Yeah. How did they manage to hold on to their culture and their religion in all these different places?
That's one of the most fascinating parts of Jewish history, honestly. Even when they were dispersed, they found ways to keep their core identity alive. They built communities, established synagogues, and continued to practice their faith. And, they also found ways to engage with the cultures around them, which led to this incredible diversity of Jewish traditions and expressions.
Oh, right. That's how you get those distinct cultural groups like the Sephardic Jews in Spain and the Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. As they migrated and settled in different parts of the world, they adapted their customs and traditions to their new surroundings. It's like this mix of preserving their heritage and also innovating within that framework.
So you've got this long period of diaspora, but then there's also this golden age in Spain. What made that time so special?
The Golden Age in Spain, which was roughly from the 10th to the 12th centuries, was this incredible period of intellectual and cultural flourishing. You had Jewish scholars, poets, philosophers making huge contributions to science, medicine, philosophy, literature. Think of figures like Maimonides, whose work had a massive impact, not just on Jewish thought, but on non-Jewish thought, too.
It sounds like this amazing time of creativity and cross-cultural exchange. But knowing history, I bet it didn't last forever.
You're right. sadly, things started to shift. The political landscape changed, and tolerance gave way to, well, growing intolerance.
And eventually that led to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492.
It was a devastating blow for the Sephardic community, forcing them to scatter again and seek refuge in different parts of the world.
It's a pattern that we've seen before, you know? It's kind of heartbreaking, especially after they had experienced such a period of flourishing.
It is a recurring pattern, but it just underscores the incredible resilience of the Jews. Time and again, they faced expulsion, persecution, placement. They carried their traditions and their faith with them wherever they went.
Yeah, that spirit of resilience is definitely something we see throughout their entire story. But what was happening in other parts of Europe during this time? Were Jewish communities facing similar challenges elsewhere?
Yes, unfortunately. Throughout the Middle Ages, Jewish communities across Europe faced all kinds of persecution and discrimination. Often they were confined to ghettos, had to live under really restrictive laws, and were often blamed for all sorts of societal problems.
It's a reminder that even when things are really dark, the human spirit can find a way to endure. But as we move towards the modern era, it feels like things begin to change, right?
Right.
Wasn't there a movement towards greater freedom and equality for Jewish people in Europe?
Yeah, you're thinking of the Jewish Enlightenment, also known as the Haskalah. This movement started in the 18th century and really emphasized reason, education, and integration into European society.
So kind of similar to the broader Enlightenment that was happening across Europe at the time, the focus on individual rights and freedom.
Exactly. Jewish thinkers like Moses Mendelssohn argued that Judaism could totally be reconciled with modern values, and that Jews could be both loyal citizens of their countries and faithful to their religion.
It sounds like a step in the right direction. But was it really that easy? I mean, was there pushback against these ideas?
Oh, definitely. There was resistance both from within the Jewish community and from outside. Some traditionalists saw the Haskalah as a threat to their way of life, and some non-Jews just weren't ready to accept the idea of Jewish equality.
So progress, but also some roadblocks along the way. And around this time, another movement is gaining momentum. Zionism.
Right. While some were focusing on integrating into European society, others started envisioning a different future, a return to their historical homeland. That desire for a Jewish state, fueled by centuries of displacement and persecution, that's what gave rise to Zionism.
It seems like a pretty radical idea at the time, especially considering that the land was already inhabited by other people. Who were some of the main figures pushing for this?
Well, Theodor Herzl is considered the father of modern Zionism. He'd seen the rising anti-Semitism in Europe firsthand, and came to believe that the only way to guarantee the safety and security of the Jewish people was to create a Jewish state in their historical homeland.
It's a vision that eventually becomes a reality, but not without some serious challenge. And tragically, the horrors of the 20th century would only make the Zionist movement strong.
You're talking about the Holocaust, of course. It's impossible to overstate how much this event impacted Jewish history and really the whole world. The Nazis' systematic genocide during World War II resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews. It was an act of pure barbarity.
It's a horrifying reminder of what can happen when hatred and intolerance are allowed to run rampant.
Absolutely. And it's against this backdrop of unimaginable suffering that the Zionist movement gained new purpose and urgency. The need for a safe haven, a place where Jews could determine their own fate, free from persecution, it became more important than ever.
And this eventually leads to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. It was a moment that reshaped the Middle East and had a profound impact on Jewish people all over the world.
You're right. Creating Israel was a turning point in Jewish history, a culmination of centuries of longing to return to their ancestral. It was a victory, but it also came with its own set of challenges, complexities, and conflicts that are still being addressed today.
Yeah, it wasn't just a simple happily ever after, was it? Our sources talk about conflicts and ongoing challenges right from the start.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine what it must have been like going through the Holocaust and then seeing the creation of Israel. What a moment in history.
Absolutely. And, you know, the establishment of Israel wasn't just this victory for the Zionist movement. It also really impacted Jewish communities all over the world. You know, it created a sense of hope, a sense of pride, and like this renewed connection to their ancestral homeland.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it wasn't the simple happy ending, was it? I mean, our sources mentioned conflicts and challenges right away.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, the very next day after Israel declared independence, they were attacked by neighboring Arab states. It was actually the first of several wars that Israel would have to fight to defend itself. And then, of course, there's the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You know, such a complex issue with no easy answer.
It seems like a situation where everyone involved has their own claims and historical grievances, right?
Yeah.
It must make finding a path to peace so difficult.
It really does. And to understand it, it's important to remember that there are multiple narratives here, multiple perspectives. It's about these competing claims to the same land. This clash between two peoples who both feel so deeply connected to this territory.
So the creation of Israel, while a huge victory for the Jewish people, it also created a whole new set of challenges. There's a lot to process, even for a deep dive like this.
It is, and we haven't even touched on the internal divisions within Israeli society itself, the political and religious viewpoints, or even just the challenges of integrating immigrants from so many different places.
It seems like every chapter in Jewish history just adds another layer of complexity. But throughout it all, there's this incredible sense of resilience. It's a theme that runs through their whole story, wouldn't you say?
You said it. From the very beginning to today, they've faced persecution, exile, war, but they haven't just survived. They've thrived. They've built communities, preserved their culture, and contributed so much to the world.
It's really pretty amazing. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say are the biggest takeaways from all this? What can we learn from this long and complicated history of the Jewish people?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is that resilience we keep talking about. That ability to adapt, to overcome adversity, and to hold on to hope even when things are at their worst. The Jewish people have faced so many challenges, but they've never given up. They've always found ways to rebuild, to reimagine, to keep their traditions going.
It's a message that resonates, don't you think? Especially for anyone who's going through a hard time.
It really does. And it's this reminder that even when things feel bleak, there's always that possibility of renewal, that you can find strength and hope in unexpected places.
It makes you think about how important it is to preserve culture and heritage, too. The Jewish people have managed to maintain their identity and traditions for thousands of years, even when they were scattered all over the world.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Their story really shows how powerful culture and heritage can be, to sustain and unite people, even when they're dispersed or facing and their dedication to passing on their stories, their rituals, their values from one generation to the next. Well, that's a big reason why they've survived.
And I think there's a lesson here about the importance of understanding different perspectives, too. Their history is full of interactions with other cultures, other religions. It makes you realize that there's rarely just one single narrative to any historical event.
That's so true. It's about embracing the nuance, recognizing the complexity, and being open to seeing things from different angles.
It reminds us that history isn't just facts and dates. It's about human experiences. And those always have their own unique perspectives and meanings.
Well said. The more we understand history, the more we understand ourselves and the world around.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I think we made it through this deep dive into Jewish history. It's been a journey through thousands of years, full of highs and lows, resilience, adaptation, and just this constant richness of culture.
And it's a story that's still going on, a story that teaches us about what it means to be human, about the power of faith and culture and all the complexities of our shared history.
We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully it's given you a place. So pick up those sources we mentioned, dive deeper into this incredible world, and keep exploring. Until next diving.